Joining us this morning, Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey, who's in the studio with us. And Senator, it looks to me like this so-called super committee, you might just call it the business as usual committee, because it looks like the whole thing's just going to fizzle out, that nothing is going to happen.
Well, I will acknowledge the time is short now. It's going to be very difficult. But there were 12 members of this committee put an enormous amount of time and effort into trying to accomplish something. It's not entirely too late yet. It's still possible to reach an agreement, but it's going to be tough given where the clock is.
Why? I mean, everybody in America knows that something has to be done. Everybody in America knows there are going to be some bad things, that everybody's going to have to take a little bit of the bitter pill, and yet the Congress cannot find a way to come together. Compromise has been a dirty word. Why do you think that's happened?
You know, it's been enormously frustrating for me and for many of my colleagues. As I said, we've got 12 good people that worked hard on this, but on the other side, there was an insistence that we have a $1 trillion tax increase. There was an unwillingness to cut any kind of spending at all unless there was a huge tax increase. Our friend Jim Clyburn, the congressman from South Carolina, said, as recently as last week, said twice, in fact, that the Democrats never coalesced around any plan. So it was just very, very challenging, very, very difficult. There is still an opportunity. There's a plan on the table that would at least take us halfway to our goal, which is it's on the shelf, it's scored, it's ready to go. If the Democrats would agree to that, we could still get something done. If they'd come back with a counter proposal, we'd work on it.
Well, I mean, if the dog hadn't stopped to make a phone call, I mean, he would have caught the rabbit. I mean, it's this whole if. As a member of this super committee, you actually proposed a modest increase in revenues by eliminating loopholes and some deductions. Some people are calling that a tax increase in exchange for some serious spending cuts and some entitlement reform that went nowhere. One of the problem, Senator, is that so many Republicans, I think that 238 congressmen, 48 senators, including one Democratic senator, Ben Nelson, and 2 Democratic representatives, plus all of the GOP candidates, including yourself, Huntsman did not, signed a pledge sponsored by this group called the Americans for Tax Reform. Now, this is a group headed by Grover Norquist. He's not a household name, but people in Washington are clearly afraid of him. It just so happens that our friend Steve Croft interviewed Grover Norquist, and they're going to do a story about him tonight on 60 Minutes. Let's just get a little sample of Grover Norquist here.
I mean, you make it pretty clear. If someone breaks the pledge, you're going to do everything you can to get rid of him.
To educate the voters that they raise taxes. And again, we educate people
to get rid of them,
to encourage them to go into another line of work, like shoplifting or bank robbing, where they have to do their own stealing.
You got them by the short hairs.
The voters do, yeah.
So there you are. Now, you did actually sign that pledge, the Grover Norquist pledge, but you were willing to go ahead and put this plan out on the table. I think he said that if your plan was actually enacted, it would be poison.
Well, let's look at this as an indication of how far Republicans were willing to go to try to find a solution here. First of all, I don't think we have a tax revenue problem in Washington. We have a spending problem. As recently as 2007, with the current tax rate, we had a budget deficit that was tiny, 1.2% of GDP. But if we just both went into our respective foxholes and weren't willing to consider the other side, we were surely not going to get an agreement. So we asked ourselves, is there any way we could find of putting some revenue on the table, because the Democrats are absolutely adamantly insisting on this, and do it in a way that wouldn't be harmful to the economy. So consider this. We have an irrational, counterproductive tax code that's unfair and hinders economic growth, and we have, in 13 months, the biggest tax increase in American history. So what we suggested was, if we could reform the tax code, simplify it, lower rates, get rid of some of the loopholes and write-offs, and the special interest treatments, avoid this gigantic tax increase that's coming. We shouldn't have to increase revenue to do that, because it's good pro-growth and pro-jobs policy, but we'd be willing to, if that was the price it would take to get Democrats to agree to this strong economic growth program and some reforms that are really driving this problem, reforms of the big entitlement programs. It was a reach for us to put that on the table. Grover Norquist was very critical of me personally and this idea.
But you actually went against him.
That's, yeah, I think what I've done is consistent with the commitment I made to my constituents, because it would have gotten us that pro-growth tax reform and avoided a huge tax increase. But not everybody sees it that way. And I've taken a lot of arrows for this, as my colleagues.
So what happens now? Let's say the committee fails. Nothing happens. These automatic cuts go into effect at the end of next year. Do you think Congress will actually let that happen, or will they change the law before we get to that?
The silver lining in what is going to be a huge disappointment for me if we don't have a real success here. The silver lining is that we're going to get the spending cuts anyway. That was designed into the bill that created the committee in the first place, that raised the debt ceiling. The $1.2 trillion in spending cuts, however, I think need to be reconfigured. They're done in a way that would be very harmful to our nation's defense. Our own Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, has said that they would hollow out our military. So I think it's very important that we change the configuration, but that we not abandon the spending cuts, because we need them.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for being with us. And we'll be back.